For 6 steps to creating a killer service catalog. Turns out you don't have to love the one you're with. This is Lindsay. I'm here to introduce your lovely speakers today, who are Amanda Fairbrother Castillo.
Yes.
Yay. And David Crouch. I am also here to keep an eye on your questions as we go throughout the conversation, if you have them, or if you have any comments. If our audio goes out or if there are technical difficulties, go ahead and just type whatever your heart desires in the question box. I will keep an eye on it, and we'll probably save all the questions to the end. But if it's especially relevant to what's going on, I will rudely interrupt David and Amanda. So without further ado, I'll pass it to Amanda, who's going to tell you a little bit about herself, David, Beyond 20, and then we'll get rolling. Amanda?
Yes, thank you. So a little bit about Beyond 20 before we get started. We're really a 360-degree ITSM company. We can help with almost any of your ITSM needs. So we provide ITIL training. We also perform ITSM and ITIL assessments, process consulting, process design. We can help with IT costing, strategic planning, obviously service catalog, which is why everyone's here. We also perform Sharewell implementations, and Sharewell is an ITSM tool, and we will show you some examples during today's webinar of some service catalogs in Sharewell. So that's a little bit about Beyond 20. A little bit about me. I'm Amanda, like Lindsay said, and I am it's very true. That is me. I am a senior advisor here at Beyond 20. I am an ITIL trainer here as well, an ITIL expert. And my background is with the federal government in the civilian sector. So I worked in the civilian sector for about 13 years and then came to Beyond 20. I was a manager, an IT manager, mostly with service desks, some full service IT departments, small service desks to very large desks for the federal government, receiving up to 30,000 calls a month. And I'm also a new mom, so that's me. And also with me to discuss service catalogs today is David Crouch. He is another senior advisor here at Beyond 20, also an ITIL trainer and an ITIL expert, and a certified Scrum Master and a PMP.
Thanks, Amanda. I'm glad to be your sidekick today, your Ed McMahon, if you will. I have more than 20 years of experience in IT. I worked for many years at Johns Hopkins University, doing both university and health system work, and worked really in the whole life cycle of IT. Started off with financial management and then moved on to doing things like service catalogs.
We can't move on, I don't think, without appreciating the Cloud Appreciation Society.
That's right. The Cloud Appreciation Society is not the cloud that we think of in IT. This is the real clouds, an organization that teaches people about the science behind real clouds and also uses that as a metaphor for taking the time out to do some creative thinking. Think laying on your back as a child and imagining shapes in the clouds. So I spend very little time doing that these days. But
let's do that for the rest of the day.
I like
Sounds good.
Okay. So before we start cloud gazing, let's talk about our agenda for today. What is a service? Just to talk a little bit about the basics before we get into the service catalog. Then what is a service catalog? We're going to go over 6 steps, how you can really get started, and then we'll answer any questions that you have. So without further ado, what is a service? So ITIL defines a service as a means of providing value to customers by facilitating outcomes customers want to achieve without the ownership of specific costs and risks. The reason why we need to talk about the definition of a service before we get into a service catalog is because it's something that you'll need to talk about before you start building your service catalog, because you'll need to talk about what does a service mean for your organization. David, anything stand out in that definition to you?
I could just say that looking at the quote here, I know in my life I've gotten a lot of quarter-inch drills, but not many quarter-inch holes. I mean, when you think of a service, you can apply this to anything from a restaurant menu to building a house to IT. So a lot of times the customer doesn't always exactly know entirely what they want in terms of all the nuts and bolts, but they have an idea of what that ultimate outcome they want to achieve is. And that's a really tough thing for IT organizations to do, to kind of get into the customer mindset, to understand services from the customer point of view, and then to package that all together into something that that customers can actually look for and understand and order, hopefully, and want to pay us for.
Yeah, exactly. Also, another example is to think about electricity. As a commodity service, I should say, when I plug in my cell phone to charge into the wall, I don't necessarily care about how the electricity is getting to the wall. I just care about that my cell phone is going to start charging. So in IT, a lot of times, our customers, they don't care about the server, the router, or the pieces that make up that make the magic work in IT. They just care about the outcome that the customers want. So we have to remember that our customers don't want to get into the weeds. They want to focus on the outcomes, and we'll be served better focusing on our customers' outcomes as well. Service catalog. So the definition of a service catalog is a database or a structured document with information about all of our live IT services. So basically, we just want a single source of information that our customers can go to. We want to make it easy for them to get to, and we want to make it available to them. David mentioned earlier, a service catalog is very similar to the menu of a restaurant. So if you think about going into a restaurant that didn't have a menu, I don't know about you, but it'd be very difficult to understand. It'd be very difficult to decide to go into that restaurant if you didn't know what they offered. So in IT, a lot of times we expect our customers to know what we offer without making a catalog available to them. And I don't know about you, but if you've ever worked, if you've ever worked in an IT department that didn't have a service catalog, I know that I have, and my customers would expect basically everything from us. So it really can help manage expectations. And that kind of leads us into the business case of why you might want to, how you can sell this idea if you need some buy-in. The business case to create a service catalog can be to really improve the partnership between your IT staff and your customers. You also can improve reporting. If your service desk is currently not set up based on services, for example, if they intake a ticket and they don't categorize it by a service first, it can be very difficult to report back and to determine the health of your services. So the service catalog can really help to improve reporting. It'll help you focus your continual service improvement efforts, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. And it can also really help with financial management. David, you want to touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of times when IT is trying to have that conversation with the business, what value does IT bring to us? One conversation is all about cost. This is how much it costs to run IT. But the better conversation to have is what sort of value is it giving you? And that value has to be defined in terms of, what the customer needs from IT, not the other way around. But when you do a comprehensive IT service costing initiative, you really have to start with the service. I mean, you look at all the different components that comprise the service. You look at all the different people who are supporting that and the salaries. You look at overhead. You look at shared costs. If you don't define the service, what you end up with is a hodgepodge of different costs. And that's better than nothing, I guess, but it'd be much better to figure out what that comprehensive service is that delivers a real outcome to a customer.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So we're going to go through a little menu exercise here before we get into our steps. So we mentioned earlier that a service catalog is like the menu of a restaurant. So if you just list everything that a restaurant may offer, which is a lot of times what people start with when they are trying to build an IT service catalog. They get into a habit of just listing everything that IT does. But if you were to go into a restaurant and see deep fryer on the menu, it's not something that you can order. Even though you need the deep fryer to make the French fries, your customers, they don't care what kind of deep fryer you have. They are in there for the outcome of getting those French fries. And in IT, our customers don't come to us and say, yeah, I'd really like a RAID array for in the server room. No, they come to us and they say, I need some more storage. I have a bunch of files and I'm out of room. They don't care about how we get them that outcome. They just want to focus on, they want us to focus on the outcome for them. So that's kind of the first step. Focus on the customer-facing services. So we're going to eliminate hamburger buns, napkins, the deep fryer, anything that's behind the scenes. Those are things that in ITIL we call an enabling service, sometimes an enhancing service. But really, we want to focus on what services the customer needs, and that's what you want to put into your catalog. Another thing that's going to really help you, we're going to get to this in our steps as well, is to identify and define lines of service. So lines of service, again, going back to the menu analogy, could be your appetizers, your entrees, your sides. Instead of looking at a menu and seeing everything jumbled up together, a restaurant lays out the offerings in groupings. So when you're building your IT service catalog, doing something very similar can be very helpful for your customers as they're looking through trying to find what they're looking for. If you, for example, have 100 services and you just list the 100 services, it's going to be very difficult for your customers to find what they're looking for. So grouping them in lines of service is going to be really helpful.
And I think if you can come very close to what the lines of business are for your business customer, if you're thinking about an internal business customer, the closer you can come to defining your IT lines of service aligned with the business lines of service, the better. So, for example, if you are a university hospital, maybe one of your lines of business has to do with students and education. Another one might have to do with patients and delivering services to patients. So if you can group your IT services in a similar fashion, that could be very valuable when ultimately trying to show what IT is bringing to the table.
Absolutely. So this is tying all of that together. Your service catalog is going to be very similar to your menu. Your service categories are going to be the groupings that your customers are going to look to be able to dig into their services. So for example, a service category may be communications, and then underneath that category they may find telephone support, or they may find even mobile device support or conferencing. We're going to get into that in a little bit here. And then once they find their service, then you could even list different service offerings or different requests that they might make, like request a phone or reset my voicemail. So let's get into the steps here. So first we're going to identify the stakeholders, then we're going to define lines of service. We're going to create a catalog template. We're going to talk about how you would actually define and categorize your services, publishing to staff and customers, and how to integrate the service catalog with other processes and with your continual service improvement initiatives. So the first step here, identify stakeholders. Why do you think it's important to identify your stakeholders, David?
You know, a lot of organizations skip this step, much to their peril. Because if you don't identify your stakeholders, really who that end customer is, then you end up coming up with services that sound like IT and that are things that IT finds need, or things that IT really thinks has value from IT's point of view, but not from your customer point of view. Sometimes organizations are afraid to reach out to stakeholders because the fear is that they'll get too many ideas and too many cooks in the kitchen. There are ways of identifying stakeholders and getting input without setting up the expectation that you're able to do all of everything that every stakeholder wants.
Right.
But you really need to figure out who that customer is.
Yeah, who your customer is, and also what voices you need to hear from within your IT department. So identifying your stakeholders really needs to be the first step for any IT initiative, including your service catalog. I should also mention the RACI model. Once you've identified your stakeholders, especially the ones who are going to be really crucial to your service catalog initiative, it's really important to create a RACI model. RACI stands for Responsible, Accountable, Consulted, and Informed, and this is used to define your stakeholders' responsibilities. The really critical piece of this is you're going to need an owner for your service catalog. So basically your service catalog owner moving forward, they're going to be the person who's accountable for maintaining the service catalog once it's developed, for managing everyone's expectations. They're going to be responsible for the whole project, and then the ongoing upkeep of the service catalog moving forward. So you really need that owner, the service catalog owner identified.
Yeah, that's one thing that a lot of organizations, wonder about. Who should be the person who maintains that catalog going forward? And the fear is that if you have one person or a couple of people doing it, that's a lot of work to place on a few people to reach out to service owners to figure out what the updates are, and that they, how could they ever manage this? And then the other question is so maybe we should allow the service owners access to the back end of the service catalog and allow them to go in and do that. And then that's probably not a good practice, because what you end up doing is either people don't do it at all, or they go in and they do it, but there's less consistency. There's no consistency with how they update the information or what they provide. So a good practice is to identify a service catalog owner, maybe a small team of folks who do this consistently. You can notify or request for your service owners periodically to provide updates to the service, but have those provide those to a team of people, 1 or 2 or 3 people who are going to actually make those updates in the system.
Yeah. I've seen customers, some of our customers have identified a service delivery manager as the owner of the service catalog, because that person is going to be working closely with the customers and with IT. They can kind of bring that feedback from the customers into IT to make the changes. Any other roles you've seen as a service catalog owner?
Only I would say that depending on the size of your organization and the number of services really depends on how that defines how the role evolves. In some cases, you have so many services and so many updates that you need somebody to do that more or less full time, or even a small team. But in other organizations, to be honest, you probably, for a lot of organizations, your services and your service offerings aren't going to change every day.
Yeah.
So in that case, you might have somebody who is doing that job routinely, but as a part-time thing. So they set a schedule of routine activities that they do, but it's not their only job.
Yeah, Absolutely. Maybe service desk manager might be a good person for that.
If they have the
In a
time to
smaller
do it in a smaller
organization.
organization, if you have a service management team or a true service management organization, then having a role in that team is, could do that.
All right, let's move on to step 2. So defining your lines of service. So your lines of service, again, you can think about these as your big buckets that you're going to use to put your services into. This is going to be really helpful when you're defining your services, and it's also going to be helpful for your customers when they're looking for your services. So this is like our appetizer list or our entrees list. These are just some examples that kind of a starting point that we use sometimes. Administrative and business services may include finance or accounting. Some more customer-facing services might be in your endpoint computing. You might have that's where probably your desktop services are going to fall. And under teaching and learning, that might be more something that a university might have, right?
Mm-hmm. That's right. Yeah. Again, I would, in terms of defining lines of service, the closer you can stick to what your overall business services are, the better. It might not be possible to have a one-to-one, but really keep asking yourself the question, how does my customer understand this? You'll find that different customers will have different ways of understanding this. But I mean, if you think of, any other great example of a catalog, if you think of like the quintessential Amazon example, right?
Yep.
They have a lot of money, but they put in a lot of time and effort to figure out how those customers understand those services. If I select a big category or something, how does my customer understand it? So for one organization, you might say endpoint computing, another one that might be desktop computing. You might have other options even within that, but those evolve over time. But really trying to pull your customers if you can, speak to people, figure out how they understand these services, and don't get too IT geeky on this.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing about the lines of service that one challenge that I see customers get hung up on here is that maybe they're not happy with the way it's going to be presented. At this initial step, this is just going to help you to define. This is going to be a big step in helping you to define your services, and you don't necessarily have to use these in your in how you display this to your customers later. But this can be really, really helpful. Instead of starting from a blank page and trying to list a bunch of services all at once, you can really focus your efforts here by defining some lines of service. And to kind of bounce off that point, another item that we recommend is to create a service catalog template. We actually have one available for download on our website, and this is going to really, again, help you so you're not starting from a blank page. Once you start to develop your services, it's going to give you a list of common items that you're going to want to define for all your services. A description. So think about when you're displaying your service catalog to your customers, you're going to want to have a description so they know what the service is. A lot of these items may not necessarily show up in your customer-facing service catalog, but they're going to be really important for your service catalog owner to manage your service catalog going forward. So for example, having a service owner defined for all of your services. That's not necessarily something you might want to display for your customers because you want them to contact probably your service desk for everything. But if a service were to change, then your service catalog owner is going to have a point of contact to go to for that service. Having your SLAs defined. If you don't have SLAs in place right now, a service catalog is a great place to start because you really need to have your services identified before you set agreements with your customers on how you're going to respond. Service hours. So when are these services available? Any business contacts? Well, how are we going to report on these services? Pricing. What lines of service are they going to fit into?
On the lines of service business, we do have a question I think might be helpful to clarify right now.
Okay.
So are these lines of service for IT or for the business? And to further read the question, IT may not perform accounting services, but they may support them in the software.
Right. Okay. So that is a great question. I'm just going to flip back to the previous slide. So these lines of service could be for either the business or for IT. For example, like infrastructure services aren't something that the business or the customers are going to see on the end catalog. But you need to have the infrastructure in place, and IT may need to see that service. So one of the things that we recommend as part of your service catalog template is defining if these services are going to be customer facing or not. So infrastructure, that whole line of service might not be customer facing. And in that case, it would be an IT line of service. Endpoint computing, that would probably be a customer facing service. So, and to kind of go off what David said earlier, it all depends on your business. It depends on your customers and how are they going to want to consume this information. So getting them involved, if it makes sense to list business services, then you should reword your lines of service and keep that in mind.
Yeah, I don't want to what if it too much because every organization is going to be different, but just to give you some real practical examples. So if you're running an ERP system, SAP, PeopleSoft, something like that, right? It could fall under an administrative or business or even financial service, right? But that's not necessarily something, IT doesn't do SAP, it doesn't do PeopleSoft, but it probably supports the application or supports the environment. So if somebody, for example, needed to get the software installed onto their machine, needed access to it, wanted to request that a new module be added to it, you could find it. You would be able to find it in that catalog if it's something that IT supports. Think of a healthcare environment. You could think of anything that relates to patients. Well, the hospital does a lot of things, hopefully for the patient, I was about to say to the patient. Hospitals do a lot of things, to promote patient health. IT is not going to do anything, not going to do all of that, but what it might do, for example, is support clinical applications, or it might support some of the OR systems. So you might have in that context a category for a line of service that's patient-related IT services or something along those lines.
Yeah. Let us know if that clarified for you. So the template, I think we covered the template pretty well. Did you want to add anything here, David?
Yeah, I was just going to say that sometimes when people see the template or they approach us, they think, oh my heavens, a couple of things. One, we don't necessarily think in terms of services. I used to joke that sometimes I would call it the stuff that IT does, because we know that we do a lot of stuff. I mean, hopefully we're doing a lot of stuff if we're getting a paycheck. But the question is, do we think of it in terms of a service? A lot of times organizations just think of the application level or just think of the technology, but they don't think of that more comprehensive service. So the other thing that sometimes holds people back or confuses people with the catalog template is that they'll say, well, if let's say we have 30 services, maybe for 15 of them I have a lot of the information that could be filled out on this template, but for the other 15 it's pretty inconsistent. Some of them I have one or two pieces of information, other ones I have a couple of these columns that I could fill out, but not all of them. And I would say that ideally, you'd want to have this template absolutely completely filled out, but you don't have to start with perfect. You can start with gathering the information that you have, and then really, spending some time and effort going around to some of the service owners, or if you don't have service owners to find, as close as you can come to who might be accountable for that service, and really asking them questions. Sometimes those owners are afraid when you do an exercise like this because they're afraid that their name is going to be in there, their phone number, there's some information maybe that they don't want to display. And again, I would just remember that gathering the information is one thing. What you display to the end customer is another thing, and they could serve two different purposes.
Yeah.
So gather more probably than what you display is probably roughly a decent guideline.
And to that point also, this project isn't going to happen overnight. You're not going to go into work tomorrow and say, I'm going to build a service catalog and have it done by the end of the day. So not having all of this information is very normal starting out. This is a deceptively hard thing to do. And just even if you could fill in a couple services and a couple descriptions at a time, you're going to be better off than not having anything. So don't be discouraged if you look at this and you think, I don't know all this information, I can't do this. Start it out, and you'll see it'll kind of come with time.
We believe in you.
So let's talk about how kind of the steps once you have the template in place. How do you start filling that template out? So the next step here is going to be to define your services. What we recommend to define your services is to get your stakeholders together in one room, if it's possible. So having everyone together in one room is going to help you fill that template out a lot faster. Having everybody together, you're going to get everybody's insight instead of having to do it yourself. Another thing you should really do is ask your customers what services they use. You can really get a really good gauge of how that can really help you in how to display your catalog later, what format you should use. Another thing that is helpful is to ask your IT department, what are some of the common requests you receive? What are some of the top items you work on every day from your customers? And make sure that you have a service that matches up with those items. Also, having your lines of service here is going to be helpful so that you have some place to start from. You also want to categorize your services if they're customer facing or if they're technical, and that's kind of what we mentioned earlier. What services are your customers going to need to see, and what services are you going to need to have in your catalog behind the scenes for your technical view? What things do you need to enable those customer facing services?
Yeah, so I mean, most of the really good tools out there on the marketplace, and we don't like to focus as much on tools, like to focus more on the process. But a lot of the good tools will allow you to provide multiple views. So there are many times when IT needs to order a service from another IT department, but it's not something that the end customer out there cares about at all. You could present a view using identity management rights and all that sort of stuff to present only to IT or technical people so that the business doesn't even need to worry about seeing those services. A couple of other ways to try to figure out what your common services are. You could do things like a ticket analysis. Now that's not going to be perfect, but it will maybe give you a hint as to where to look for commonly requested items. You can look at website hits, multiple ways that you can sort of deduce what your services are. But at the end of the day, I would always go back and try to find customer representatives, people who you really think understand what customers want. Use data, but confirm that data with real people. I wonder, though, Amanda, how many people do you think is, a good idea to get together in terms of your stakeholder meeting? Is there a maximum or minimum number?
Yeah, that's a good question.
50,000?
Having too many cooks in the kitchen can definitely be an issue. So when we perform a service catalog workshop and we we try to keep it around 10. So between 8 and 12, 10 is really that sweet spot there. Otherwise, you can just, it can get a little heated sometimes, which is why we offer a facilitated workshop. Honestly, everyone has really strong opinions when it comes to this, because these are the tasks that we perform on a daily basis in IT. So everybody wants to see their work up on the board, and sometimes things that happen behind the scenes might not always show up in the customer facing catalog, and it really helps to have a facilitator there to talk through everything. But if you're going to do this on your own, I would still say you want to limit it to probably 10 or under, because it's a lot of expectations to manage at one time.
Amanda, maybe if you had added beer to your menu before, this would calm your stakeholders down a little bit.
That was definitely an oversight on my part. Beer should have definitely been on the menu. Okay, so let's move on to step 5. So publish. This seems so obvious, although a lot of times we work on everything, and if, let's say you don't have a tool to put your service catalog into right now, you don't have an online request system, but you do want to start building your service catalog. You may say, well, I'm not going to publish my catalog to my customers until I have a way for them to actually place orders. I would highly recommend that you publish your catalog as soon as you have it complete. Even if it's just if you make it available as a Word document, or if you just make a website where you list your services, it's going to immensely help your IT staff. It's going to help your customers to understand what you do. It'll help your service desk to have kind of a way to set expectations with your customers. If the customer calls and your service desk can point them to a service catalog, it's going to be really helpful for them. And having multiple customer views. David, you want to talk about how customer views might be helpful in like a university service catalog?
Yeah, so there are a couple of different ways to think about it. One school of thought says that if you offer a service, as long as it's not a technical or IT specific service, right, that's only meant for your behind the scenes staff. But if you offer a service one school of thought says that you should make it available so that everybody can see it, even though they might not be able to order it. The other school of thought that I think is a little bit more common is that don't frustrate people if they can't actually order the service. Don't let them see it. There are pluses and minuses of both, but if you think about it, for example, if you have multiple schools within your university, the College of Public Affairs and the School of Medicine and the College of the College of Nursing, they may have their own individual services that, some that are shared amongst everybody and some that are very specific to that school. So potentially you could publish a view that would show people only what they're able to access, only what they need. I know that one big one for a lot of universities is displaying the different software that they can order. And had I not been part of an effort like that, I would have never imagined that was so popular. I'm like, who cares? It's just software, right? But in that case, a service catalog that displayed software was really used to drive, to show that IT had value. Suddenly people start to like IT a lot better because they can see what they wanted to order, and it's amazing how quickly that began to change the perception of IT.
Here's a question that's kind of interesting in light of what you guys were just saying. I've actually never thought about it this way, but if you're, I guess the opposite perspective on if people can't have things, don't make them available to them. I get angry when I realize there are things I can't have. But what if, things are available to everyone and they're ordering them even though they don't need them? If you're flooded with requests for something because it's available, but it's completely unnecessary.
Yeah, I
Does that
mean,
make sense?
so there are a couple of ways I think to deal with that. So I remember back in the days when iPads were the latest and greatest new thing. You know, good guidance is that you want to be able to address every request, but you don't necessarily fulfill every request.
Yep.
So in the iPad world, they weren't the cheapest things on earth, and we weren't getting them for free or at a discount. So in that case, we wanted to see who was ordering those, those iPads, but we certainly weren't going to allow everybody to get it. Maybe some VIPs, maybe some people who can really show a real need. So behind the scenes, at a level below the service, right, or a level or two below the service, where you just have an offering, you can use a tool to build a workflow in of approvals. So you want to know who's requesting the item, but you set up rules for how that item actually gets approved and finally delivered to you. So if David, here at Beyond 20, we do a lot of consulting. We mostly have laptops. If I were to go out and want to order like the fanciest, most expensive desktop, you'd want to know that I need that, but you probably wouldn't fulfill it because it's not something that would really be useful to me. It doesn't make sense.
You can't fly with it.
Yeah, and there's probably some balance there. I mean, if you are really getting flooded with tons of requests from people who want, expensive items that they don't need, maybe you have to put in some reasonability tests and say, hey, we don't want everybody to go out there and do this. But I think you do want to have a good idea, on the other hand, of what your demand is. So what are your customers really wanting? And if you don't know that, then IT runs the risk that over time it increasingly provides stuff that IT thinks customers need, but not what customers think.
Yeah. Another example I've seen in my experience is requests for remote access. And that's something that maybe there's not a huge cost associated with it, but we did require manager approval in the past for that, because if the employee didn't have a need to work from home, then there was no need to fulfill that request. So yeah, I highly recommend using customer views, using role-based views, because you don't want to necessarily have things that people can see but aren't allowed to order. Okay, so we're going to show an example of what a service catalog might look like in a little bit. But on to our last step, process integration and continual service improvement. So once you have your service catalog built and you have it available to your customers, you're going to need to create a service catalog policy, and this is going to be part of your service catalog owner's responsibility. The policy is going to help manage the service catalog. It's going to help define when do you add a new service, how often do you have to review your catalog, how do we request changes to our service catalog? When do we remove something from the catalog? And it's also going to help you to refine your roles and refine your views. Like David was mentioning earlier, if you have a lot of people requesting something that never ends up being fulfilled, then you might need to revisit that and possibly change the way you're displaying your catalog. And then also keeping your catalog under change management, making your catalog a configuration item and making sure that when you do need changes to it, that someone is submitting a request for a change and that it's going in for authorization before those changes are made. Having a lot of people with access to make changes to your catalog is not going to be a best practice, and it's going to probably make everything more confusing for your IT staff and for your customers. Another integration that we wanted to talk about was with request fulfillment and integrating your service catalog with your ITSM tool. This is going to be a great automation tool, and it's going to really help to to drive folks to your website and to kind of facilitate self-service. If people can go to a website and request access to a shared drive, that's something that could be completely automated, and people may never have to call your help desk for those items. Even if an authorization or an approval is required, that can all be automated into a tool. So having your service catalog and integrating it with request fulfillment is a great place to get ideas on how to automate and how to help lower the amount of calls that are going to be coming into your service desk.
Yeah, and what a lot of organizations do is that, you know, they may have a website that's not integrated with the tool, a website that just shows services, or even, as I said, the kind of the stuff that IT does. They'll have something like that, but don't necessarily have the automation behind it, or even if they do have some level of automation, it's probably not as good as what you're going to get in the tool. When you integrate it with an IT service management tool, the other big benefit is that now you can track it. How many people are ordering that iPad? How many people want this service? And you also can tie it to workflows behind the scenes for, you know, approval. So this is a case where, you know, generally we would say start with your process. That's not easy.
Yeah.
Define the service, get the process down right first. Don't begin with the tool, but a tool really can be helpful once you get, you know, 80% of the rest of the stuff done really well. Then use the tool to help automate and you know, make it all better.
So let's move on to an example of what a self-service service catalog might look like integrated with an ITSM tool. So this is an example of a Sharewell service catalog, and in this particular example, what we've done here is we've listed the top 8 requests that customers might make, and we put those prominently on the top of the catalog. If you were to scroll down the page, you would see the entire catalog listing where people might go and find. You have lines of service here, and then you have different services and requests that people can make underneath those lines of service. So for example, employee support services, IT might offer onboarding and offboarding, making an employee change request. Maybe they have a name change, or requesting an ID badge. But if a customer, you probably aren't onboarding. That's probably not something that every single customer is going to select on a regular basis. So the most common requests are listed at the top. Reset my password. My computer has a virus. My laptop was stolen. Hopefully that's not happening a lot, but apparently it was happening enough that it needed to be prominent in the requests field. So so there's kind of two different common ways that we see catalogs displayed. One is to list all of your services and all of your lines of service and let customers go and find the service they're looking for. And the other one is this, where you're listing your top 10, so right on top, and that can often solve 60 to 70% of the issues that people are going to come there to request. And then listing your services below for those folks who didn't come for one of the top hits.
Yeah, I think the real key here that makes us a winner is having multiple ways to search. So
yeah,
you know, you can have the request level if you know exactly what you want. It's not the full service. You need a new laptop, you need a piece of software, whatever, you can search that way. If you want to go a level above and see all of the different services that desktop offers, you can look at that. And then you could also typically go up into a search bar, type in what you want if you don't quite know, and then find it that way. So giving people different ways to find information is important.
Yeah. And this is something that before you kind of roll this out, you definitely want to get some feedback from your customers on what they think, because they're going to be really important stakeholders when you're deciding on a format and deciding on your layouts and the verbiage that you're using here. Okay, let's talk about some challenges. So stuff that IT does.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, a lot of organizations start with what I call the stuff that IT does. So they're not really services. A lot of times they're things that are, at it's stuff. It's application level stuff. Here's the piece of software that I want. Here's installing a telephone. Here's providing a new audio conferencing account or whatever the case is. But some organizations say, well, we have all this stuff. How do we package that all into services that customers understand? So it is good to start somewhere. So if you have the stuff, it's probably good to take an inventory of that. But it's better to start by, or better to get to the point of defining services, how all that stuff fits into services that customers, can really understand.
Yeah. And as we mentioned earlier, you don't want to focus too much on the tool. You don't want the tool to necessarily be a factor on whether to create or not create the service catalog.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of times, people will immediately, IT organizations will immediately go out and they're looking for somebody to help them to implement a tool, and that's important. That's great, but it's probably more important to define what that service is, before actually developing in the tool or kind of doing it at least a little bit in parallel as opposed to just focusing on the tool itself. The tool will do, most of them will do, the good ones will do anything you want them to do. But the question is, are you doing the right thing? Are you defining it the right way?
Yeah.
Another thing that I see a lot is that when you begin an initiative like this, especially if you don't have services defined, nobody wants to be the service owner. Who, me? I'm not the service owner. Well, you're the director, and the people that manage this service or these things that we might call a service, they're all in your department. You have budgetary control. You can say yay or nay. Oh, but I don't want to be the owner of it because that suddenly makes you accountable. So really trying to figure out who those service owners are. They probably aren't called service owners. They probably have another title. But figuring out who those are is really important because these are your primary contacts for the items that you're displaying, the services you're displaying in the catalog. A couple of other ones that I've encountered is that, some organizations are afraid either that they have too much information, so that's probably on the stuff side, too much information to display in a catalog, and they don't know where to begin. Other organizations, going back to that template that we talked about, they say, well, we don't have enough information or the information is inconsistent, so how could we even start this? Without having information about all the 200 different, things that we do, and then how do we turn that into 30 services or whatever. And I would say start with what you have. I mean, that's a good idea to start with what you have. Doesn't mean it's perfect. You'll probably never get to perfect, but, begin somewhere. That's not a good excuse for not beginning something like this.
I guess that's all we have. Do we have any other questions, Lindsay?
We do. We've got a couple here. Let me see if I can take them in the order they arrived. I think we already got to that one. Oh, here's an interesting one about, this is going back to gathering all of your stakeholders. This person's experiencing an issue where IT management is pushing back when it comes to even identifying the stakeholders in the first place. Do you guys have any advice for, I don't know, convincing them that this is an important endeavor?
Oh yeah, it's not an easy sell, but I mean, I think the biggest fear is that a lot of times your end customer or your business customer doesn't really know exactly what they want. They have some notion of the things that they do on a day-to-day basis, but it's hard for them to really verbalize that or so as IT, I think part of our responsibility and part of our value is that we can help customers to verbalize or elicit those unspoken things that they want to do, those unspoken outcomes. The risk is clear. If you don't do this, it becomes another IT, tool in the toolkit, but it's a tool that nobody wants that tool, right? We talked about the drill. Nobody really wants the drill. They want the 1/4-inch hole. So I would say that again, set the expectation that you don't need to have every customer in there. It's probably some combination of, your business owners, so the people on the non-IT, on the business side, who actually can help to pay for some of this, who really have a sense of what their larger departments or organizations need, and maybe in some cases a few end users. Like, think of like your super users who are constantly going. They can be very chatty people. They can be people that are using a lot of your services. But there's no reason why you can't have a few of those in the room, or even if you don't want them in that room for the service catalog workshop, you can at least speak to them in advance and get some notion. Not everybody has to have a seat at the table, but you want to give a lot of people at least some voice. And again, don't set up that expectation that you're necessarily going to do what everything that they want. I mean, that would be unrealistic, but thank them for giving the input. I mean, you can try.
Yeah, and just another quick thought on that. If someone's hesitant when you're asking them to identify stakeholders, they might think like, oh, this person's going to ask me to do a bunch of stuff that I don't want to do. So just think about when you're dealing with your stakeholders, think about what's in it for them. And if they're not going to want to do a lot of work, then maybe identify the stakeholder, try to start the process, and maybe then ask them for the review instead of just saying, hey, I need you to identify the stakeholders.
Cool. Before I read this next question, we've gotten a couple questions around what we'll be sending out in support of this afterward. We're going to send you a video of the session early next week, and we'll also send you a PDF of the slide deck we used today and a link to a service catalog template that you can download from our website. So all of that will be available Monday or Tuesday of next week for you guys. So I think we've got time for one more question. Anything we don't get to here today, we'll be sure to reply to you guys via email because these are really good questions. So off we go. We have a few services where the customer might call 3 different departments depending on the problem, only one of those being IT. We are constantly redirecting calls, and it is sometimes frustrating to us and them. How would you recommend showing these options for the service, even though technically they aren't supported by IT?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And some of our customers are actually moving toward what we call a unified service catalog. So it may be all of your IT services with your human resource services and your facility services in one place. You could have, you could start down that path. You could consolidate your catalogs into one unified catalog. You might think about how do people know that they have to call other desks or other lines? I mean, if you're redirecting a lot of calls, then I would think you probably have you may have a marketing issue or you may be lacking a single point of contact that might really help clear things up for your customers.
Cool. All right, can we do one more?
Sure.
All right, yay. Let's see. Okay, we encounter a lot of management resistance in trying to define customers because it takes time and isn't easy. We get responses like, it's the business, we know who they are, it's everybody in the organization. That's hilarious. Any advice on dealing with this?
Well, I would, again, depending, if your management is pushing back on these things, try to do as much of the heavy lifting for them. I know it's not easy, but having these things in place is going to make your life easier. So even if you have to do the legwork and your management doesn't want to get involved, eventually they're going to realize that your efforts are making them look good as managers. So sometimes you just have to do a lot of the work on your own. But if you get a good start then your managers are gonna eventually get on board. Again, thinking about what's in it for them. What are your managers' pain points? What are their hot buttons? How is this initiative going to help them? A lot of these are are things that are going to be really specific to your organization, but those are good things to start thinking about.
Yeah, make it as easy as possible for
Yeah.
people. Even the business customers sometimes don't want to initially get involved because they don't have the time to get involved. But if you make it easy, if you have focus meetings, you have agendas for them, you keep meetings to a minimum. I mean, none of these is a silver bullet in and of itself, but if you could do a lot of that work up front and then show your manager, hey, these are the things that we've done so far, and they're working pretty well, that can help to move the needle a little bit there.
Cool. Well, we're at 1 o'clock. I'm sure you guys are busy, so we will let you go on about your day. But we've got a handful of questions here we didn't have time to get to. We will. Can I volunteer you to answer them via email?
Sure.
Yay. See how you didn't have a choice because all these nice people are still here?
Even though Amanda didn't put a beer on the menu.
That's true. Boo. Okay, so have a lovely rest of your Thursday, everybody. You'll be hearing from me shortly with answers to your questions and some content. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Thanks.